Bengals radio color analyst, former Pro Bowl center, Eric Wood, who is also the host of the Centered on Buffalo podcasts, along with What's Next with Eric Wood as well. Wow, you got 2 podcasts, man? I didn't even know you had 2. Holy cow.
Yeah, the What's Next one's been on hold for a little while. I did have that one running for about 3 years. It was great, learning from a bunch of people after my career ended, and then now just really focusing on the Centered on Buffalo podcast.
Yeah, that's the one I'm seeing out on social all the time. You're pumping it out, man.
Yeah.
You're killing it.
Yeah.
All right, well, you've heard the coach speak coming out of the first preseason game, and, not the standard. Probably Babich addressed the media this morning. He was asked, how'd you get on the wrong end of a 33-6 final? He said fundamentals, one-word answer. Would you tend to agree with that? Is it as simple as fundamentals, or is there a sense of urgency to mix in there? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to me, they came out and, if the Bills left Josh Allen in a little bit longer, I fully think they would have continued to move up and down the field. They pulled him out. He was 2 for 3 in the game. The run game didn't get going with the starters. That's not a huge concern for me. Josh Allen said after the game they only had 4 run plays in for that game, and Chicago seemed to be very keyed in on those. And so not a huge concern for me, but I will say, whether it's fundamentals or simply just not being sharp. I mean, the amount of pre-snap penalties in that game were just off the charts. I know that just drives Sean McDermott up the wall, but that's the beauty of these preseason games. You get to have a lot of coachable and learning moments like those. And so they continuously put themselves behind the chains with all those pre-snap penalties. And then this is Chicago's second preseason game. So some of those young guys that got a lot of action, similar to the Bills, that was their second preseason game action, which can make a big difference when you're transitioning into the NFL. So not a ton of concern from me, most of the way across the board. There are a good amount of new starters on this team, but with the core that the Bills have with Josh Allen and the rest of this cast, I'm not concerned at all after that first game and what their season projection will be.
How do you think having one full practice before this game against your opponent, how does that change things for the mindset going into these games?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how Sean McDermott handles this. Me and Chris were talking last week that it wouldn't surprise me, especially with Josh, to let him go against the first team Steelers defense in a bunch of specific situations, whether that's red zone, third downs, specific situations where you're not taking any shots on the quarterback, and both teams are going to be guarded in how they handle the opposing team's quarterback. So you get Josh Allen some great work, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him not play in this preseason game number 2, but then have a number of your other starters and guys that are competing for spots. Those guys, I'd imagine, will still play in the game, but when you head into a joint practice, a lot of times it's a heated situation. There's fights with Sean McDermott and Mike Tomlin. I'd imagine that they'll coach these guys up beforehand. Like, look, we're not out here looking for fights. That's only going to probably hurt your chance of making this roster if you go out and embarrass us out there on the field by causing one of these big skirmishes that us media members, I was going to say the media, but I say us media members like to run with in these situations. So I'd imagine that they'll get some good productive work here tomorrow, being Thursday. And then when it comes to the game, it wouldn't surprise me to see Josh Allen not be out there, but we'll see how Sean wants to handle this.
All right, so give us the player's perspective here. What are the pros and cons of a joint practice? Whether you're an entrenched starter or a guy scraping to make the roster. Give us the pros and cons there.
Yeah, the biggest pro would be you're going against a guy in a different uniform. You get tired of going against the same guys over and over all the way through training camp. So you get another essentially training camp practice, but you get guys in a different uniform and you can work against different schemes. The Steelers run a different style of defense than the Bills do. So you're getting some great quality work against some different faces and guys in different uniforms. The cons would be you're not doing a whole lot of prep on the front end. So especially for an offensive lineman, if I'm not familiar with these guys, sometimes it can be a really tough matchup. The intensity ramps up a great deal to where, up front, it's about as close to a game-like situation as you're going to get in a practice setting. So it's very intense, which I guess increases the risk of injury. And then the con would be, you have a lot of guys competing for roster spots. You have 90-man rosters, 53 guys are going to make each team. And so guys are fighting tooth and nail to make the team, which can often lead to those skirmishes that we see out there. Now, I'm thinking with it just being one joint practice, it probably won't get as chippy as they do when you go 2, maybe 3 practices in a joint practice setting. But I guess we'll see tomorrow.
You've seen all off season the transition take place from Mitch Morse to Connor McGovern. You saw the enthusiasm that Connor McGovern took over with. I mean, he was excited about it. Now we've got this spot where you got Connor McGovern, you've got Cedric Van Pran Granger, and you've got Will Clapp. Will Clapp with some chops in the NFL
Alec
too.
Anderson even too.
And Alec Anderson has played center. So you got you have 4 guys, and aside from nobody, you got to have a center on your roster at all times, even if there's a bus wreck on the way to the stadium and you're off. You got to have somebody snap the ball. Give us your philosophy on how they're going to handle this. I mean, they got 4 guys that can get it done. What's your philosophy?
Yeah, it looks to me like Connor McGovern is going to be the guy, and I appreciate you guys recognizing that center's that's the most important position in football. So I appreciate you guys recognizing that first and foremost. To me, it looks like Connor McGovern is going to be the guy heading into this season. His snaps look fine in the game. Didn't seem to be any issues, but I think that's something that they want to continue to see in the preseason game, just get them more and more comfortable. Josh Allen had worked with Mitch Morse. They had all that chemistry for so long. They want to make sure that there's not going to be any center quarterback exchange issues heading into the season. Alec Anderson, I mentioned when he was in the game with the twos, his ball was coming back a little hot. Sometimes quarterbacks, if I was ever snapping it a little too fast, they would say, hey, that makes it a little harder for me to catch. Sometimes I'm going to fumble with the ball back there if you're throwing it back there too hard. But, every center is different in how they do it. And to me, one of the guys that stood out to me when I was kind of looking back at some of the tape was Cedric Van Pran Granger, who I've been excited about. I thought his tape at Georgia was incredible, and he looks like a guy that can really handle himself. Now, he's got a ton of SEC experience. He's been playing a lot of big-time football, so that makes your transition to the NFL a touch easier, but I thought he looked really good out there when he got his action last Saturday against the Bears. So and then Will Clapp has done it in the NFL, so you've seen that on film. To me, it looks like the 5 starters are entrenched on that offensive line. If there became issues, you always feel comfortable bumping McGovern back to guard with Edwards over there, and then it becomes, who do you like in the rest of them? Is it Van Pran Granger? Is it Alec Anderson? But I don't think the Bills are going to get to that point. I truly think they like what they have in McGovern.
We had a question that got tweeted in from a listener. They said, keep hearing about the league having trouble with deep balls due to cover 2 defenses. Why is that? If the Bills run the ball efficiently enough with the short pass, won't defenses adjust? The short answer is yes, but is it more complicated than that, Eric?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily even just cover 2 defense. It's that 2 deep defense, which oftentimes turns into cover 4, where you have 4 guys deep with the corners and a bail technique with safeties over the top to try and take away those deep balls. Me and Chris talked about it in the pregame that at some point we're going to see a fundamental switch back to more 12 personnel, maybe even having more fullbacks in the game if defenses just keep getting lighter and lighter. And think back to the Cowboys game last year when they decided to put a safety in the box and run nickel defense, but essentially a 4-1 defense with only 1 true linebacker on the field. And the Bills just ran the ball down their throat. And that's what offenses can do if you continue to stay in looks like that. So, those kind of positionless players at the second level, those linebackers that can cover, the former safeties that are now playing linebackers, those guys are valuable because they can play the run and the pass. But at some point, I feel like there's got to be a fundamental shift back to, okay, we're going to keep you honest. If you're going to sit in small defense, we're going to pound you up the middle. If you're going to keep your safeties high, it leaves you more susceptible to those bubble screens. And heck, we saw Curtis Samuel steal 13, 14 yards in about a second. And that showed what kind of quickness he has on the outside. So offenses are going to combat it, but that's where you're seeing a lot of these sustained drives for touchdowns for the Bills these last couple of years, because teams are saying, look, Josh has got one of the biggest arms in the league, and especially with Gabe Davis, and Diggs could take the top off the defense too. Okay, now we got to keep our safeties high, and we've seen Josh develop into a more disciplined passer and just taking what's more underneath.
It's interesting too, because all these changes and the trends that happen in the league, and I don't want to I don't want to sound like an old player, but I'm an old player. And that's what it comes down to. You got a player that's special. The Bills come out in 2 linebackers, 5 DBs, and for all during Leslie Frazier's time, you couldn't get him out of it because they had a special player in Taron Johnson. He'd step up, take on a pulling guard at 5'10", 190, or whatever it is he is. He was scrappy and competitive enough to do it. It's about your players giving you the opportunity to do what you want to do defensively and something that the other team can't outmatch up. So that's really what we're looking at here with this Bills team. All new players, different skill sets. How can we get into a personnel group defensively or offensively where they can't outmatch us? And I guess that's what my question is to you. Offensively, do you see any possible personnel grouping off the top of your head, like which guys are going to be a matchup impossibility?
Well, I think that's their 12th personnel. And we lost Dawson Knox early in the season to that wrist injury. And even before he went on IR, he was really affected with that wrist, which hurt his blocking ability. And then he had a few uncharacteristic drops, I feel like was likely because of that wrist injury. So, for the Bills coming out in that 12 personnel package, and even Reggie Gilliam last year, they would use him, put him in the game, maybe try and dictate your personnel defensively. Okay, well, this is our fullback, but they also feel comfortable putting him in the slot at times. We even saw that in the preseason game the other day. So being able to use some of those bigger pieces, especially that 12 personnel, and then also using Reggie Gilliam to more dictate to the defense. The Bills run 6-0 linemen as much as anyone in the NFL as well, to where they can put an extra offensive lineman on the field and try and dictate what you're going to do. But I feel like especially if those top 2 tight ends can stay healthy, that's a formation and that's a personnel that they can really dictate to the defense. And then when you consider how much speed they have on the outside right now with Shakir and adding Curtis Samuel out there, Keon Coleman, and you look at those guys on the outside, plus a Dalton Kincaid, who is a great receiver himself, they can dictate personnel-wise at times how you're going to line up. And then oftentimes, and I even felt like this when I was playing, when we would spread out the defense and not let them pack the box, oftentimes that was when we could run the ball the easiest. So it's not always, hey, let's get bigger and then run the ball. Oftentimes, and me and Chris talk about this on the broadcast often, get bigger and make them pack in the defense, and then you try and take your shots down the field.
Yeah. Last one from me, Eric. We were disappointed in the production of the run game in preseason game number 1, knowing you're probably still not game planning for Pittsburgh. How do you anticipate the coaching staff and the players kind of improving the production in that area? I mean, it doesn't seem like a big ask, but how do you see them going about doing it in a preseason setting?
Yeah, it's not going to take a lot to improve, especially the running back production from last game. It just wasn't there, and it's timing stuff. It's getting fits on double teams and getting enough movement where the pullers can get around you. It's getting to the second level of the defense, and Chicago is filling downhill extremely fast. Even when there wasn't penetration up front, the linebackers are making the play for 1 or 2 yards, and so this goes back to Bobby Babbitt's original point, where it's the fundamentals. I thought one of the biggest thing in the game was just not being sharp and constantly hurting yourself down and distance wise with pre-snap penalties. But then you get back to the fundamentals. The fundamentals is what's going to help this run game. And and I'm not going to say that, David Edwards coming in at left guard, the combinations at left guard and center are different, at left tackle and left guard are different. And then with McGovern switching in, it becomes different combinations with Osiris and McGovern. I don't think that's a huge issue because they've had some time under task between the spring with the start of fall camp. But yes, Sean McDermott, the offensive coaches are going to put a heavy emphasis on it. Wouldn't surprise me to see an uptick in the run game this week.
Yeah, and with the uptick in the run game, how do you get a downtick in the pre-snap penalties? Because I get it. I mean, I was a player too, and you get out there and you're thinking about, because it's all new, and you're trying to think about what you're supposed to do and how well you're going to do it and what the guy you're doing against, and then all of a sudden you're off a half a step too quick. All of that stuff's going on. What kind of message can an NFL head coach give a team in this state? It's 90 guys. You got a lot of young guys that are busting a gut to try and make it. They got all this stuff going on in their head. I mean, how do you cut through the fog and say, hey, stop jumping off sides?
Yeah, tell them to relax a little bit. Hey, look, you have the talent to make the play, whether it's defensively, you have the speed to make the play. You don't need to get a jump on the snap. And then offensively, it's about staying focused, it's about communicating. The pre-snap penalty on Ray Davis was a first timer for me. And, the Bears got in a 6-up look, and oftentimes on passing downs, you'll see that running back cheat up into line. It'll help with stunts and twists. And I guess his helmet broke the plane of the center's hip, which makes him now an offensive lineman, creates an illegal formation. I've never seen that called once. I'm not sure if that was an emphasis heading into this season where defense coordinators were complaining that, look, these running backs are getting too tight to the ball, but I've never seen that call. And poor Ray Davis thinks he's doing a perfect job where he gets up in the line of scrimmage and they have decent pass protection, and then all of a sudden pre-snap penalty again. But it's about settling in, and it's about communication. And then, like you said, Steve, you get in that first action, and the amount of just illegal formations where guys weren't sure who was supposed to be on or off the line of scrimmage, they'll iron that out this week. Maybe it wasn't as much of a point of emphasis. Maybe they took it for granted a little too much that these guys understood those concepts. And I'd imagine Sean and his crew will have that cleaned up for this week.
Yeah. All right, Eric, thanks for the insight. We appreciate it. We'll see you out there in
Thanks, Steve.
Pittsburgh on Saturday.
Yep, sounds good. I'll see you guys soon.